You are not weak for taking things personally. You are human. But imagine for a moment what it would feel like to live without that constant defensive alertness. What would change if criticism no longer shook you to your core? If silence didn't stir anxiety, if you could stand in your truth without explaining or justifying yourself? That's not fantasy. That is the promise of shadow work, not as a spiritual gimmick, but as a grounded psychological path toward self-integration. Jung understood what modern society often ignores, that the parts of you you've disowned are not your enemies. They are your keys to freedom. When reclaimed, they return to you as confidence, creativity, and emotional clarity. Why do we take things so personally? Why does a glance, a sharp tone, or an indifferent silence sometimes cut deeper than the words themselves? The modern world often tells us to toughen up, to not let things get to us. But what if the issue isn't in the external world at all? What if the emotional pain you feel isn't weakness, but a call from your own unconscious? To heal, you must first acknowledge you are not broken. You are fragmented. There is a difference. The part of you that takes things personally is a part that has never stopped trying to protect you. It reacts quickly, forcefully, sometimes irrationally, but not because it's your enemy. It reacts because it remembers pain. It remembers what it felt like to be dismissed, ignored, or invalidated. And it doesn't want to feel that again. The shadow, in its distorted way, is trying to shield you from hurt. But in doing so, it also cuts you off from connection. It builds walls where you long for bridges. And every time you silence that inner voice or shame your sensitivity, you deepen the divide within. Here is where psychological maturity begins, not by erasing the parts of you that hurt, but by understanding them. Not by pushing down your reactions, but by bringing them into the light of awareness. When you take something personally, pause and ask yourself, what old story is being reawakened right now? Who am I trying to protect? What part of me was told it wasn't enough? These are not questions meant to weaken you. They are keys. Because the truth is, your triggers are trailheads. They lead you back to what has been abandoned. And what has been abandoned, when reclaimed, becomes part of your strength. Jung didn't ask us to become perfect. He asked us to become whole. And wholeness doesn't come from numbing your feelings or pretending you're unfazed. It comes from turning toward the pain and saying, I see you. You're part of me, and I will not exile you any longer. Carl Jung taught us that the psyche is not a flat landscape. It is layered, dynamic, and deeply symbolic. At its core is not just the ego, your conscious identity, but the vast terrain beneath it, the unconscious. And it is in that vastness where we meet what Jung called the shadow. In this way, your sensitivity becomes sacred. Your emotional responses become signals. And your shadow stops being a saboteur and starts becoming a guide. So the next time something cuts too deep, don't just dismiss it. Listen. What if this is not your weakness talking, but your healing, calling out? Stay with me. In the next segment, we'll explore how the shadow hijacks your behavior and what to do about it. The journey isn't easy, but it is necessary, and it is yours. When you were a child, you existed in wholeness. You sang when you felt like singing. You cried in public. You got angry when something felt unfair. You were raw and alive. But slowly, society began to shape you. Parents, teachers, authority figures intentionally or not sent signals about what was acceptable. You may have heard phrases like, "Don't cry," "You're too sensitive," "Stop showing off," or "That's not ladylike," or "Man up." These moments weren't just fleeting lessons. They were emotional events, psychological markers that shaped your internal map of the self. And so, you began to adapt. You split. You began to push certain emotions and qualities into the basement of your psyche because they threatened your sense of belonging. You did this not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. A child will abandon parts of themselves to remain loved. That is how the shadow is born, not as something evil, but as something exiled. The problem is, what we exile does not die. It waits. When someone criticizes you today, you're not simply hearing their voice. You're hearing the accumulated weight of past disapproval. You're not responding to the moment you're reacting from the wound. That's why your nervous system spikes. That's why your mind races to defend, justify, or retreat. You're not just protecting yourself from this person. You're unconsciously protecting a younger part of you who once learned that love could be lost if they showed too much, felt too much, or simply were too much. This is what Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." So, no, you're not overreacting. You're reenacting. And unless you become aware of it, the cycle continues. You'll walk through life hypersensitive to tone, always scanning for rejection and wondering why peace seems to elude you. But here lies a turning point. To understand the nature of your emotional reactivity, why you take things so personally, you must first recognize that the present moment is rarely experienced as it is. Rather, it is filtered through the unconscious, the inner archive of memories, wounds, beliefs, and disowned parts of the self. This is why something small like a sarcastic remark or someone forgetting to reply to a message can trigger a disproportionate emotional storm. It is not the comment that wounds you. It is what the comment awakens. They're always trying to get attention when you long to be seen. They're too emotional when you've buried your own feelings for years. This is not blame, it is revelation. Because the world becomes your psychological canvas. And until you become conscious of your projections, you will keep drawing the same story over and over, expecting the outer world to fix what lives within. So what do? The first step is to pause the narrative. When you feel triggered, whether through anger, shame, jealousy, or hurt, do not immediately act. Instead, inquire. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." So ask, what am I feeling? What memory or belief does this feeling connect to? Is this reaction coming from my current self or from a younger self that still feels unseen? These questions are not designed to intellectualize your emotions. They are meant to bring you back into relationship with the shadow, to invite the unconscious into the light of awareness. And this awareness is the healing, because once you see the pattern, you are no longer trapped in it. This is the psychological pivot from reactivity to responsibility. You stop demanding others behave a certain way to keep you comfortable. You begin to take ownership of your own internal world. Carl Jung observed that what is unconscious will seek expression, and when it is not integrated consciously, it expresses itself in ways that feel automatic, irrational, and even self-sabotaging. This is the work of the shadow, a hidden but powerful force that intercepts your behavior, colors your perceptions, and projects your inner conflict onto others. The second step is compassion. When your shadow shows up, when you lash out, withdraw, or feel deeply triggered, do not meet it with shame. Meet it with curiosity. Speak to it like a wounded child who was never allowed to cry, never allowed to speak, never allowed to shine. Because that is in many ways exactly what it is. When you soften your response to your own pain, you loosen the grip of the shadow. It no longer has to shout to be heard. It begins to trust you. And slowly over time, your nervous system recalibrates. Your perception becomes clearer. You stop projecting the past onto the present. You begin to experience life as it is, not as the shadow fears it to be. And here's the paradox. When you do this work, when you reclaim what you've rejected, you don't just stop taking things personally. You start living personally. That is from the core of who you are, not the armor you've worn to survive. The shadow is not the enemy. It is the unspoken chapter of your story. And when you read it with honesty, compassion, and courage, you become the author again, not the character controlled by unseen forces. In Part 3, we'll explore the 5 practical tools for shadow integration, the steps that move this understanding from theory to transformation. Stay with me. The journey inward has only just begun. Let us make this more tangible. Imagine someone criticizes your idea in a meeting. Logically, it's a simple challenge, but emotionally, it feels like a gut punch. Your heart races, your throat tightens. You replay the moment over and over. Why? Because the shadow does not hear just this critique. It hears all the times you felt small, dismissed, or unworthy. The comment becomes a vessel carrying echoes of the past, often your childhood, when your authenticity felt unsafe or unwelcome. This is what Jung called being possessed by the unconscious. You are no longer responding as an adult with grounded awareness. You are reacting from a wounded place, a younger, more vulnerable part of yourself that believes its survival depends on being accepted, being right, or being invisible. And in that moment, you don't see the other person clearly. You don't see the situation clearly. You see through a distorted mirror created by your shadow. But it doesn't stop there. The shadow does not only emerge in moments of rejection, it also surfaces in the presence of another's light. Have you ever noticed yourself feeling irritated or envious when someone else is confident, expressive, or joyful? That too is the shadow. Because often we reject in others what we have repressed in ourselves. If you were taught to tone yourself down, to not be too much, someone who shines freely might unconsciously remind you of the freedom you lost. Their light touches your inner darkness not out of malice, but as a mirror. This unconscious projection is perhaps the shadow's most clever mechanism. You begin to experience your inner world as if it belongs to someone else. You say things like, "They're so arrogant," when in fact you fear expressing your own confidence. Awareness of the shadow is not the end of the journey. It is merely the threshold. Once you see the shadow, once you understand how it has shaped your emotional reactions, perceptions, and relationships, the natural question becomes, what now? How do you begin to integrate it? How do you reclaim what was hidden and become whole again? When was the first time I felt this way? What belief am I holding right now? This shift from reactivity to inquiry moves you from victim to conscious participant. The trigger becomes a mirror, and in that reflection, you begin to see the parts of you still waiting to be welcomed home. 3. Dialogue with the shadow. Active imagination. Jung introduced a method he called active imagination, a process of consciously dialoguing with aspects of the unconscious. Imagine sitting across from your shadow as if it were a separate person. Ask it, what are you protecting me from? What are you afraid of? What do you need from me now? It may sound strange, even childlike. But remember, the parts of you stored in the shadow often are childlike, frozen at the age they were first rejected. When you allow them to speak without judgment, something extraordinary happens. You don't silence the shadow. You listen to it. And in that listening, it softens. Write down these conversations. Draw them. Sit with them. This is not make-believe. This is psychological integration in motion. 4. Reclaim the disowned traits. The shadow does not only contain wounds, it contains gifts. Qualities you were once punished for or told to hide: your boldness, your creativity, your voice, your sensuality, your power. These are not flaws. They are dormant strengths waiting for permission to rise again. Carl Jung never suggested that this path would be easy. He called it a moral problem, one that requires courage, honesty, and the willingness to confront what we have long denied. But he also believed that it was the path to individuation, becoming the full and authentic expression of the self. Integration is not perfection, it is unity, and it begins with practice. Look at the people you admire most. Ask yourself, what is it in them that stirs me? Often what you envy or idolize in others is a reflection of your own buried potential. Integration means dusting off what you've hidden and saying, you belong here. You are part of me. Start small. Speak a truth you've withheld. Express an opinion you're used to swallowing. Create something without apology. Let your forgotten brilliance breathe. 5. Practice compassion, not control. You cannot control your shadow into submission. You cannot bully it into silence. The way forward is through relationship, through compassion. The shadow does not need to be fixed. It needs to be understood. Each time you feel ashamed of your anger, your fear, or your insecurity, pause and say to yourself, of course I feel this. I wasn't allowed to express this safely before. This self-talk rewires your nervous system. You no longer treat your emotions as enemies, but as signals, as messengers, as old friends bringing truth from the past. With compassion, your inner world becomes safer. And as safety grows, reactivity shrinks. You don't suppress your reactions, you create space around them. And in that space, you gain choice, power, peace. This is the real work, not mystical, not glamorous, but raw, consistent, and honest. And it is spiritual precisely because it is so deeply human. In Part 4, we'll explore the final stage: how integration transforms your life from the inside out. How reclaiming your shadow unlocks your creativity, restores your confidence, and allows you to move through the world with grounded freedom. Stay with me. You're closer than you think. Below are 5 tools that serve as stepping stones toward reclaiming your inner landscape. Each one, though simple in concept, carries the weight of psychological depth and the potential for profound transformation. 1. Radical self-honesty. The shadow feeds on denial. It thrives in the places we pretend. Pretend to be unaffected. Pretend to always be kind. Pretend we're not scared or envious or angry. But the moment you drop the mask, the moment you say, yes, I judge others because I haven't made peace with that part of myself, you disarm the shadow's grip. Radical self-honesty is not about confession for confession's sake. It is about creating inner clarity. When you tell the truth to yourself, even privately, you begin to separate the conscious from the unconscious. You become the observer, not the one possessed by the emotion, but the one aware of it. Begin here. The next time you overreact, pause and ask, what am I pretending not to feel? That question alone can dissolve layers of self-deception. 2. See triggers as teachers. Your emotional triggers are not random. They are signals, breadcrumbs. Each time you feel a pang of jealousy, defensiveness, or shame, it is not the world attacking you. It is your shadow raising its hand and saying, "Look here, there's something you haven't healed." Rather than reacting to triggers with judgment or avoidance, become curious. Ask, what does this remind me of? There comes a moment, often quietly, when we realize we are no longer at war with ourselves. The anger still rises, the sadness still visits, the old stories still echo, but something is different. They no longer define us. We no longer believe them without question. This is the subtle, profound sign of integration when what once controlled us becomes conscious, witnessed, and lovingly held. This is the paradox: the more you embrace your darkness, the more light you carry. 3. Liberated creativity. Some of the greatest works of art, innovation, and healing have emerged from individuals who were willing to meet their darkness and mine it for meaning. Jung believed that within the shadow were not just repressed wounds, but repressed gifts. When you begin reclaiming the parts of yourself that were silenced, your boldness, your weirdness, your passion, you begin to unlock a reservoir of creative energy. That voice you were told was too loud, it may be the voice that empowers others. That imagination you buried because it wasn't practical, it may hold the blueprint for your purpose. Integration liberates this energy. And as you use it, express it, shape it, you not only heal yourself, you contribute something real to the world. 4. Deeper relationships and true intimacy. The more shadow you carry unconsciously, the more projection you cast onto others. You don't just see them, you see your unhealed parts reflected in them. This distorts connection. It breeds conflict, assumptions, and defensiveness. But as you do the work of integration, your relationships shift. You stop expecting others to complete you or save you. You begin to relate from truth, not trauma. You're able to say, "That triggered me, and I see it's not really about you." You create space for others to be imperfect because you've made space for your own imperfection. And from that space, intimacy grows not as performance, but as presence. This doesn't mean every relationship becomes perfect, but it means you stop reenacting your childhood scripts. You start writing new ones. 5. A life of meaning, not performance. At the root of Jung's work was this: the soul longs for wholeness, not status, not approval, not control, wholeness. When you live divided, you are always performing, playing the role you think others want to see. But when you live integrated, you are simply being. And that being becomes its own source of meaning. Carl Jung wrote that individuation means becoming an individual, and insofar as individuality embraces our innermost, last, and incomparable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self. Shadow work is not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming who you already were, beneath the masks, the wounds, and the defenses. You no longer chase life. You participate in it. This is not a finish line you cross one day and declare, "I'm healed." It is a path you walk daily, gently, bravely. You still get triggered. You still forget. But now you return faster. You catch yourself with more grace. And each time, the shadow becomes less of an intruder and more of a companion. So what does it mean to truly stop taking things so personally? It means you've stopped mistaking the voice of your shadow for the voice of reality. It means you no longer let unhealed wounds steer your life. It means you've chosen awareness over avoidance and integration over repression. And that choice, It changes everything. In the final conclusion, we'll bring all of this together and explore how to carry this awareness forward in your daily life with presence, peace, and purpose. Keep going. The wholeness you seek is already within you, waiting to be remembered. This process, once undertaken, begins to ripple outward. It doesn't just change how you feel internally, it alters how you live, how you relate, how you create, and how you lead. 1. Emotional clarity and freedom. Before integration, your inner world is noisy. You are constantly negotiating between your true self and the internalized voices of criticism, guilt, or fear. But as the shadow comes into the light, clarity returns. You begin to know what you actually feel, not what you've been conditioned to feel. You recognize when a reaction belongs to the past, and you can pause instead of pounce. You become capable of responding from your adult self, not your wounded child. This clarity is not about being emotionally numb. It's about being emotionally sovereign. You don't wait for others to validate you before you feel whole. You stop outsourcing your worth. You start to trust yourself. 2. Confidence rooted in wholeness. True confidence is not the absence of self-doubt, it is the inclusion of it. It is the deep knowing that you can carry all of yourself, even the uncomfortable parts, without disintegrating. When your shadow is rejected, you walk through the world fragmented, hoping people will only see the good side. But when your shadow is integrated, you show up as you are. And that authenticity is magnetic. You no longer need to prove yourself in every conversation. You no longer shrink in the presence of strength or puff up in the presence of insecurity. You become solid not because you are perfect, but because you are whole. So here we are at the threshold between insight and integration, between knowledge and lived transformation. If you've walked with me this far, then you already know the problem was never simply that you took things too personally. The deeper truth is that an unseen part of you, the part that carries old wounds, forgotten gifts, and long-abandoned needs, was crying out to be acknowledged. And that cry echoed in the form of overreactions, defensiveness, jealousy, or pain. I invite you to subscribe to my channel for more videos that dive deep, not into surface-level fixes, but into the rich, messy, meaningful work of inner healing and transformation. And if you're feeling brave, drop a comment below. What part of your shadow are you ready to reclaim? Let's walk this path together. One step, one insight, one breath at a time. Thank you for being here. The world needs more people like you, awake, aware, and no longer afraid of the dark. Carl Jung reminded us that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But this privilege is not handed to us. It is earned through the work of reclaiming what we've hidden, understanding what we've feared, and welcoming back what we were told to reject. Shadow work is not about becoming immune to pain. It's about responding to pain with clarity rather than confusion. It's about noticing when your wounded child wants to speak for you and choosing instead to respond from your integrated self. This is a practice, not a perfection. And that's what makes it beautiful. Because the goal isn't to never be triggered again. The goal is to know when you are, to pause, to reflect, to choose. That's freedom. You may notice that you no longer crumble under criticism. You no longer lose yourself in the opinions of others. You stop walking into every interaction, asking, will they approve of me, and start asking, am I honoring what's real in me? That shift, subtle, powerful, is the fruit of integration. You become more you, and the world, though still chaotic, becomes less threatening because your center is no longer outsourced to it. And this is the paradox Jung uncovered. When you make peace with your shadow, you don't lose your edge. You refine it. You don't become less human, you become more fully human. Real, rooted, radiant. A force not because you're flawless, but because you are no longer fragmented. So as you return to your life after this video, I encourage you to carry one question with you, not as a burden, but as a companion. What part of me still waits to be seen? Because every time you ask that question with sincerity, you reclaim a piece of your soul. If this message resonated with you, if you felt seen, stirred, or gently awakened, know that it wasn't by accident. It means a part of you is ready. Ready to stop running. Ready to remember. Ready to become whole.